They thought he was just another weary traveler passing through, until a group of truckers pushed him too far. What began as taunts turned into a moment they'd carry like a scar. No one could have guessed what the quiet man would do next. Before we dive into this gripping tale, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you love stories of resilience and unexpected strength, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, we've got another unforgettable story lined up you won't want to miss. The dusk hung heavy over the endless stretch of Interstate 80, where dust swirled like ghosts across the faded pavement. Elias Kane eased his battered Ford pickup into the sprawling lot of Dusty's Roadhouse, a weathered joint squatting off a Nebraska exit, its peeling paint and sagging roof clinging to life like an old dog too stubborn to quit. The sky was bruised purple, streaked with clouds that promised rain but never delivered. A flickering sign's neon signs buzzed half-heartedly, their glow more exhausted than welcoming. Time didn't move here. It loafed, caught in the hum of cicadas and the occasional rumble of a semi rolling by. Elias killed the engine, leaned back in his seat, and let his gaze drift across the roadhouse's grimy windows. Beyond the lot, a derelict tire shop stood abandoned, its lone sign creaking in the wind like it was muttering complaints. He tugged his faded baseball cap low, slipped his wallet into his denim jacket, and stepped out. The gravel crunched under his scuffed boots, slow, measured steps from a man who'd learned the cost of rushing. Inside, Dusty smelled of fried onions and spilled beer, the air thick with years of grease and regret. Linoleum floors, cracked and curling at the edges, stretched between wobbly tables and a scarred bar counter, where a jukebox flickered with a ghostly country tune long out of style. The bartender, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Carla, polished glasses with the resignation of someone who'd stopped hoping for better days. The door's rusty hinge squealed as Elias entered, and the room stilled. Heads turned, beer mugs paused mid-sip. 6 men in flannel shirts and trucker caps sprawled across 2 tables near the bar, their laughter fading as Elias crossed the threshold. They didn't nod or smile, just stared, eyes narrowing like hawks spotting prey. Elias adjusted his cap and slid into a corner booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door. Always the door, habits forged in places louder than this. Carla approached, her pen scratching nervously against a crumpled notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice low, wary. "Just a burger, medium, and a Coke," Elias said softly. "No onions." He offered a faint nod, but her gaze darted toward the truckers, then back to the floor. They were still watching. Elias leaned into the booth's cracked vinyl, calm as a pond at dawn. But in joints like this, calm men drew trouble like moths to a flame, and he felt the air tighten. The Coke arrived first, fizzing in a chipped glass, set down with a shaky hand. Carla's eyes flicked to the trucker's table again before she retreated to the bar. Elias murmured a quiet, "Thanks," his fingers curling around the cold glass, grounding himself in its chill. But the room wasn't settling. From the trucker's table, a burly man with a grizzled beard and a gut straining his belt let out a bark of a laugh, loud enough to cut the chatter. "Well, damn," he said, voice oily with mockery. "Looks like we got a city boy who wandered off the map." His buddies chuckled, low and mean, leaning forward like dogs sniffing blood. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man named Buck Harlan, with a face carved hard by years of diesel fumes and bad decisions, tipped his chair back, boots propped on a stool like he owned the place. "Bet he's one of those types thinks he's too good for a place like this," Buck said, loud, baiting, his grin sharp as a switchblade. Elias didn't bite. He sipped his Coke, watching bubbles rise, his face unreadable. He'd met men like Buck before. Big voices, small souls, rattled by anything that didn't bow or break. But the room was tilting now. The cook, a wiry guy named Hank, paused mid-chop in the kitchen, pass-through, his knife glinting. An old regular, Gus, hunched over a whiskey at the bar, squinted toward the truckers but kept his mouth shut. "Hey, stranger," Buck called again, voice spiking. "You deaf or just dumb? We're talking to you." Elias took another sip, the soda's bite sharp on his tongue. He set the glass down, slow and deliberate, then raised his eyes. Not angry, not scared, just steady. "Heard you fine," he said, low and even. That quiet answer hit like a pebble in a still pond, ripples spreading. Not defiance, but its absence unnerved them more. One of the truckers, a lanky guy named Travis with a toothpick dangling from his lip, leaned over to Buck. "Probably some drifter," he muttered. "Thinks he's hot shit." Buck stood, slow and deliberate, his boots thudding like war drums as he crossed the floor toward Elias's booth. His crew, Travis, Denny, Wade, Chet, and a twitchy kid they called Junior, watched, smirking, their beers forgotten. Buck thrived on making folks flinch, and Elias, sitting there calm as Sunday morning, was a challenge he couldn't ignore. Buck loomed over the booth, close enough that Elias caught the reek of sweat and cheap whiskey. "You're in my spot, friend," Buck growled, the word friend sharp as barbed wire. Elias glanced at Buck's flannel, the frayed cuffs, the chain dangling from his belt like a wannabe outlaw. Then he met Buck's eyes, slow, unflinching, his gaze like a mirror showing Buck his own bluster. "Just here to eat," Elias said, voice level. "No trouble." But to Buck, no trouble was trouble. He needed a reaction, a spark to feed his ego. With a snarl, he slammed both palms on the table, rattling the glass and spilling Coke across the wood. Across the room, Carla froze, her hand hovering near the bar phone. "You don't get it, do you?" Buck snapped, leaning closer, his breath hot. Elias's eyes lifted again, firmer now, though his voice stayed soft. "Step back," he said. 2 words, quiet but heavy, like stones dropped in deep water. Buck laughed, harsh and hollow, masking a flicker of unease. "Step back?" he mocked. "Or what, tough guy?" The roadhouse went silent, save for the faint buzz of the jukebox and a distant semi-roaring past. Elias hadn't moved, but something in him had shifted. A coiled readiness, invisible but electric. The kind that hums in men who've faced worse than Loudmouth in bars. "You don't want to find out," Elias said. Not a threat, but a truth. Calm as a weather report. Buck's pride wouldn't let that slide. With a sneer, he reached for Elias's jacket, aiming to yank him up, but Elias was faster. His hand shot out, snaring Buck's wrist in a grip like iron, stopping him cold. The trucker's eyes widened, shock cutting through his bravado. "Don't," Elias said, voice still low, almost gentle, but it landed like a judge's gavel. Buck froze, his crew stirring now, chairs scraping as they stood, their grins hardening into something uglier. Buck jerked his hand free, rubbing his wrist, his face reddening. "You think you're some kind of badass?" he hissed. Elias didn't answer. He eased back in his seat, hands resting loose on the table, like the moment hadn't just tipped toward chaos. Buck spun to his crew, voice booming. "Get up, boys. Let's teach this guy some manners." And they did, Travis cracking his knuckles, Denny rolling his shoulders, Wade and Chet flanking wide. Junior hesitating but following like a skittish pup. From the bar, Carla's voice broke through, shaky but firm. "Stop it, Buck. Don't do this." He shot her a glare. "Stay out of it, Carla. Put the damn phone down." She hesitated, then complied, her hands trembling. Buck turned back, pointing at Elias. "You got 2 choices, pal. Walk out now, or we carry you out." Elias didn't flinch. He drained the last of his Coke, set the glass down with a soft clink, and stood, smooth, unhurried, like he was leaving a tip, not facing a brawl. "I'd rather finish my meal," he said, voice so calm it felt like a dare. Buck's grin twisted, predatory. "Then we do it right here," he said, and the air in Dusty's roadhouse pulled tight, ready to snap. It wouldn't be Elias breaking. The first swing came fast but sloppy, Buck's fist arcing wide, all fury and no aim. Elias didn't blink. He stepped left, fluid as water, letting the punch sail past. In the same breath, he caught Buck's arm, twisted it sharp, and drove him face first into the table with a crack that echoed like thunder. The wood splintered, ketchup packets scattering as Buck gasped, winded, his bulk sagging. The room erupted. Travis, wiry and mean, lunged next, his fists swinging wild like he was swatting flies. Elias read him like a book, the hitch in his step, the panic in his eyes. He ducked one punch, sidestepped another, then snapped a precise elbow into Travis's ribs. The trucker folded, wheezing, stumbling into a chair that tipped and crashed. 2 down. Denny and Wade came together, thinking numbers would tip the scales. Denny grabbed for Elias's arm while Wade threw a haymaker aimed at his jaw. Elias was already moving, slipping Denny's grip and yanking him forward, so Wade's fist clipped his own buddy's shoulder. Denny grunted, off balance, and Elias sent him sprawling with a shove. Wade froze, stunned, just long enough for Elias to land a clean palm strike to his chest, knocking him back into a table that tipped with a clatter of bottles. 3 down. 4. Chet charged now, big and slow, all muscle and no brains, roaring like a bull. He swung for Elias's head, but the move was telegraphed, clumsy. Elias dropped low, hooked Chet's arm, and used his momentum to flip him onto the floor. The linoleum shook as Chet hit hard, air rushing out of him like a busted tire. Elias pressed a knee to Chet's back. Not hard, just enough. "Stay there," he said, calm as a whisper. Chet didn't argue. 5 down. Only Junior remained, a skinny kid, barely 19, his hands shaking as he stood frozen. His eyes darted to his crew. Buck groaning, Travis curled up, Denny and Wade tangled in wreckage. Chet pinned like a bug. Then he looked at Elias, standing untouched, breath even, cap still square on his head. Junior saw something in that moment. Not just strength, but certainty. The kind that doesn't need to shout. He backed up, tripped over a chair, then bolted for the door. It slammed behind him, hinges squealing, his boots kicking up gravel outside. 6 down. Dusty's roadhouse held its breath. Carla stood rooted behind the bar, her hands still near the phone she hadn't touched. Hank, the cook, gaped from the kitchen, his knife dangling like he'd forgotten it existed. Gus, the old drunk, muttered something incoherent, his whiskey glass trembling. Elias exhaled, adjusted his cap, and scanned the room. Not for praise, but to be sure the dust had settled. Buck pushed up on one elbow, face blotchy, breath ragged. "Who the hell are you?" he croaked, voice cracked with pain and something like fear. Elias looked down, not smug, not angry, just steady. "Just a guy trying to eat," he said, simple as that. Denny, slumped against a stool, coughed and rasped, "You some kind of soldier or what?" Elias didn't answer. He stepped back to his booth, where his burger sat cooling but intact. He slid in, picked up a fry, and took a bite, the crunch loud in the silence, like nothing had happened. He sipped his Coke, ice clinking, and let the room stew in its own shock. The quiet in Dusty's wasn't just empty, it was heavy, like the air after a storm breaks. Glasses sat abandoned, food gone cold, every eye locked on Elias Kane, the stranger who'd turned 6 men into a cautionary tale without breaking a sweat. He ate slowly, methodically, like the chaos around him was just background noise. Buck still sprawled, Travis clutching his side, Wade and Denny untangling themselves, Chet flat on the floor, groaning low. Carla edged closer, her steps hesitant, carrying a fresh plate of fries she hadn't been asked for. You okay, mister?" she asked, voice thin, eyes wide like she was seeing a ghost. Elias looked up, his faint smile soft as ever. "I'm good, ma'am, thanks." She blinked, floored by his calm, by the gentleness in a man who just dismantled a small army. "I can get you a new burger," she stammered, glancing at the mess. "No charge." Elias shook his head, folding a napkin neat beside his plate. "This one's fine," he said, and took another bite. Gus spoke up from the bar, voice gravelly with age and booze. "Been coming here since '78, he said, staring at Elias. "Ain't never seen a man move like that, like he knew their next step before they did." No one argued. The tension hadn't just faded, it had flipped into something else, a kind of awe, raw and unspoken. Elias finished his meal, burger gone, fries picked clean. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim stack of bills and tucked them under his plate. Generous but not flashy. Then he stood, movements smooth as ever, cap tugged low. He walked toward the door, boots scuffing softly on the linoleum, passing Buck's crumpled form, Hank's stunned stare, Carla's parted lips. No one spoke. No one dared. At the threshold, Carla found her voice, barely a whisper. "Wait, who are you?" Elias paused, one hand on the door, and turned just enough to meet her eyes. His gaze held no boast, just a quiet weight, like he'd seen too much to need words. "Just a guy who likes his peace," he said. Then he pushed through, the door creaking shut with a dull thud, and he was gone. Outside, the Nebraska dusk was cool, the air sharp with the tang of diesel and prairie dust. Elias Kane crossed the lot, gravel crunching, steady underfoot, the roadhouse's neon fading behind him. Junior, the kid who'd run, stood by his beat-up Chevy at the lot's edge, his breath uneven, face pale. He watched Elias approach, eyes wide with a mix of shame and wonder, like he'd glimpsed something bigger than himself. Elias didn't stop, didn't scowl, just gave a single nod, brief but enough. Junior stepped back, silent, no words needed. Elias climbed into his truck, the door closing with a soft clunk. The engine growled awake, low and sure, no hurry in its rumble. He glanced at the rearview mirror, catching Carla's silhouette in the roadhouse window, one hand pressed to the glass like she was anchoring herself. He shifted into drive and eased onto the interstate. No drama, no rush, just a man moving on. The wind whipped through his open window, carrying the faint cry of a distant train. He wasn't dwelling on the fight, or the truckers' egos, or the eyes that followed him out. He thought of quiet, of the kind you earn, not the kind you're given. The radio sputtered, then settled on a slow blues riff, all slide guitar and soul. Elias tapped the wheel, the horizon swallowing him in a wash of twilight purple and gold. He didn't look back. Never did. 10 miles down the road, Elias pulled off at a no-name diner, a squat brick building dwarfed by sprawling fields, its sign half lit and buzzing like a dying firefly. The lot was near empty, just a rusted hatchback and a delivery van parked crooked. He nosed the truck in beside a lone gas pump, its gauge faded to illegibility, and cut the engine. The silence felt good, wide and clean, broken only by the rustle of corn stalks bending in the breeze. Inside, the diner was dim, lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered like they were on their last legs. It smelled of pie crust and dish soap, the kind of place where time slowed to a crawl. A waitress, mid-50s, with a ponytail going gray and a tag reading Marlene, glanced up from a crossword puzzle. A kid, maybe 16, all elbows and acne, slouched at the counter, scrolling his phone, earbuds leaking tinny hip-hop. Elias nodded to Marlene and grabbed a stool 2 seats down from the kid, leaving space. "Coffee black," Elias said, voice soft but clear, "and a slice of whatever pie's fresh." Marlene smiled, faint but real, and poured from a pot that looked older than she was. "Apple's good today," she said, sliding a mug his way. "Made it this morning." Elias nodded. "Sounds right." The kid, name tag said Tyler, glanced over, curious, his phone forgotten. Elias felt the stare but didn't meet it, just sipped his coffee, letting the heat sink into his bones. The pie came, golden crust flaking under his fork, and he ate slow, savoring the tart bite. Tyler shifted, clearing his throat like he was working up to something. "You from around here?" he asked finally, voice cracking just a touch. Elias chewed, swallowed, then shook his head. "Just passing through." Tyler nodded, but his eyes lingered, taking in Elias's posture. The way he sat straight but easy, the calm that wasn't forced. "You look like, I don't know, like you've seen some stuff," Tyler said, half question, half statement. Elias paused, fork hovering, then set it down. He looked at the kid, not hard, just steady, and offered a half smile. "Everybody's seen something," he said. "Just depends what you do with it." Tyler blinked, like he'd expected a taller tale. Marlene, wiping down the counter, chuckled softly. "Kid's nosy," she said, not unkindly. "Thinks everybody's got a movie script in him." Elias shrugged, digging back into his pie. "Not much to tell," he said. "Just a guy who likes pie." But Tyler wasn't done. "You ever, get in fights or anything?" He pressed, leaning forward now, voice low like he was chasing a secret. Elias took a slow sip of coffee, weighing the question. He saw himself in the kid a lifetime ago, hungry for stories, for proof the world held more than small towns and dead-end shifts. "Only when I have to," he said at last, voice quiet but firm. And I try not to have to. Tyler sat back, chewing that over, his earbuds dangling silent now. Marlene raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her crossword forgotten. Elias finished his pie, slid a 10 under the plate, more than he owed, and stood. Good pie, he told Marlene, tipping his cap. She smiled, warmer this time. Come back for another slice, she said. He nodded, maybe meaning it, and headed for the door. Tyler called after him, impulsive. Hey man, what's your name? Elias paused, hand on the knob, and glanced back. Elias, he said, simple, no flourish. Then he stepped into the night, the door jingling shut, leaving Tyler staring after him, like he'd just brushed against something he'd spent years trying to name. Outside, Elias climbed into his truck, the engine waking with a steady purr. He pulled onto the interstate, stars pricking the sky now, sharp against the black. The diner's glow faded in his mirror, but he carried its warmth, the pie, the kids' questions, Marlene's smile. He wasn't running from Dusty's or chasing anything ahead. He was just moving, same as always, the road unspooling like a promise he didn't need kept. Back at Dusty's roadhouse, hours after Elias Kane had vanished into the Nebraska night, the weight of what happened lingered like smoke you can't wave off. A table leg wobbled, cracked from Buck's fall. A smear of ketchup stained the floor. A half-eaten basket of wings sat abandoned at the trucker's table, grease congealing. But it wasn't the mess that held people. It was the story taking root. Gus was the first to break the silence, swirling his whiskey, voice rough as sandpaper. Moved like he'd done it 1,000 times, he said, eyes distant. Knew their swings before they threw him? Carla, still behind the bar, nodded slow, her gaze stuck on the door Elias had walked through. Didn't even blink, she murmured. Not when Buck came at him, not when they all did. Just handled it. Hank leaned out from the kitchen, apron stained, shaking his head. Took him apart like he was folding laundry, he said, then ate his damn burger. They'd seen bar fights before, sloppy drunks, ego-fueled scuffles. But this was different. It was clean, deliberate, like Elias had been built for moments exactly like this, trained to end trouble before it grew legs. In the weeks that followed, the story spread faster than a prairie fire. Locals swapped it over coffee at the feed store. Truckers carried it to rest stops 3 states over. Guy didn't even raise his voice, they'd say. Dropped 6 men like it was nothing, then paid his bill and left. It grew bigger with each telling. Some swore he'd taken on 8 guys. Others claimed he'd tossed Buck clean through a window. But the core held true. A quiet man, underestimated, who turned a room's assumptions inside out. For the truckers, it wasn't a story. It was a wound. Buck, who'd once swaggered through Dusty's like a king, kept his head down after that, his laugh quieter, his eyes dodging questions. At the trucking yard, he'd snap "drop it" when anyone mentioned the fight, but his hands shook when he lit his smokes. Travis took to drinking alone, nursing his ribs and his pride. Denny and Wade avoided the roadhouse for weeks, their usual bravado dulled. Chet, still sore, swapped trucking for a warehouse job, muttering about bad luck. Junior, though, was different. Folks noticed him at the auto shop a month later, head down, working hard, like he'd seen something in Elias that made him want to be more. The bruises faded, but the lesson stuck deep. It wasn't just about the fight or the strength Elias showed. It was what his calm exposed, how folks like Buck built their worth on noise, on fear, only to crumble when faced with someone who didn't need to prove a thing. They judged Elias by his silence, his solitude, his unassuming frame. They thought quiet meant soft. But what they learned, what spread from Dusty's to every dive bar and truck stop, was that real power doesn't strut. It doesn't bark or brawl for attention. It's control, honed sharp, held back until it's needed, then used with precision that cuts clean. In that roadhouse, on that lonely stretch of Interstate 80, Elias Kane didn't start a fight. He finished one and left behind a story that grew roots. In a world quick to measure strength by volume or swagger, his tale stands as a reminder. The quiet ones, the ones who move like they've got nothing to prove, might just carry the kind of courage and discipline that shifts the air in a room. Elias didn't act for glory or grudges. He acted because he had to, with a restraint that demanded respect louder than any fist could. Today, when snap judgments fly and bravado passes for might, this story cuts through the noise. It's a call to look closer, to question what we assume, because someone like Elias Kane walks among us, maybe in a diner, a boardroom, a classroom, carrying a strength we won't see until it's too late. Their stories matter, not for the fights they win, but for the truths they reveal. If this tale hit you hard, made you rethink what strength looks like, or stirred something you can't quite name, don't let it fade. Like this video, subscribe for more stories that stick, and share it with someone who needs to hear that real power doesn't need a spotlight. Sometimes it's just a man finishing his burger, leaving the rest of us to wonder.